Jessica, I am so glad that you are here today and that we get the opportunity to have this conversation. Well, okay, so before we dive in, like a couple things I have to just share. For those who are listening to this on podcasts or on YouTube or wherever you're going and you hear this or you see us, you might go, these two lovely girls have unique accents. One has a country one and one has a way cooler accent than the other.
Oh. I don't know about that.
Oh, yes. Yes. So tell us where you live and a little bit about you.
Okay, so probably no surprises. I'm in the UK. I'm in England. So I live in a little county called Shropshire, which is kind of in the middle of the country, just below Manchester, if you know where that is. And yeah, it's very rural, lots of farms, sheep. It's lovely. And I am an editor and proofreader. So I run my own editorial business and I specialise in working with non-fiction writers. So either self-publishers or through traditional publishing houses.
Well, so Jessica, outside of just you're such a lovely human, I love your perspective on really helping writers, nonfiction writers and authors kind of level up their work. Like you take what they've got and you make it better. I love editors for that reason. Like I actually think editors are some of the most important people and a part of the publishing process because kind of like the quiet heroes behind the scenes that you just, without them, your manuscript would never reach its fullest potential. So when we connected, I was like, yes, this girl is good. And not just good in the sense that, basic like copy line editing, but I love how you approach it and realize how important the author's voice is to everything. So you're a full package and I love that. And I think anybody that works with you is truly blessed and lucky to get your perspective on everything. So it means so much that you're here to talk about this. I've got a lot of people who are very interested in understanding how to make sure that their manuscripts are just good. And I realized you have the opportunity to understand from a high level perspective what that could look like because you've worked with so many authors in so many various genres. You've seen like down to the little bitty nitty gritty editing to the big picture kind of overarching, conceptual kind of direction. You've seen all of that and you know what makes a manuscript really great. So our chat today, I want us to focus on that. And specifically, I love your approach and what you call the 4 C's. Can you tell us what those are real quick?
Yeah. So the 4 C's are basically a framework that I like to use when I'm editing. And I think it doesn't really matter what kind of editing you're doing. So whether or not, you're doing the copy for your website or if you're writing a book, you can apply these 4 elements to elevate your writing. Maybe there'll be little tweaks and some parts will be more relevant to different kinds of writing than others. But they just give a nice kind of like logical 4 steps that you can go through to really know that you're hitting all the best points of the editing process. So the first one is consistency. So C for consistency. We have C for clarity. We have C for conciseness. And the last one is character. So they're the 4 C's. And just like you said, they do, when you think about it, they're quite straightforward, simple, obvious things. But I think when you are writing, you're so close to your own manuscript, sometimes it's quite difficult to see those points. So by kind of nailing down a framework and having kind of almost like a checklist, I guess, can really help with that editing process.
Oh my gosh, checklist. We should create like a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that has these on there. For those who are listening, write it out, type it, and sit it next to you. Put it on a Post-it. Because that way, every time you're looking at your content, you're asking yourself, how do you kind of rank in these 4 C's? I love that.
Let's start. Should we go with consistency?
Yeah.
Okay, so consistency. For me, I think probably is one of the key things that really sets a manuscript apart. And that's why if you ever work with publishing houses, you'll find that they place so much emphasis on consistent content. And the reason they do that is few reasons, but one, it just looks more professional. But secondly, if you have inconsistencies in the language that you're using, that can be quite confusing and quite distracting for your reader, which obviously we don't want. We want to keep them focused on your actual content and the writing. So anything that's going to trip them up, or perhaps, if you're saying one thing at one point and then you're saying it in a slightly different way later on, those are the kind of things that a reader's going to stilt the flow.
Yeah.
You're not going to be as engaged.
Yeah. It'll confuse them. And when they're confused, then they'll put your book down, or they might not pick it back up. Like that's the scariest part of everything, right? When people pick a book up to read, I always like to say they are making two investments. They're making a financial investment in your book, right? Like they're buying it. And then they're making a time investment that we're asking them to sit down and read it. And if there are those inconsistencies, they might limit that time investment, which means your message isn't going to get fully across. And what if the best meat of your book is, and your message is in the later parts and they don't get there, or what have you? Yeah, inconsistency is huge. And I see inconsistencies many times, not just in sentence structure, but even in chapter flow, and kind of just the overall layout.
Yeah, it really is holistic. So from how you present each chapter and things, like the presentation wise, so the font that you use, your headings and the spacings, you want all that to be consistent and uniform and all align. And then at the sentence level, it's more like things like how are you spelling certain words? How are you presenting? So, for example, how are you going to write your numbers? Are they going to be in numerals, or are you going to spell them out? And, if you had a word like coordinated, are you going to spell it with a hyphen or without a hyphen? Both are fine. Both are absolutely correct, as long as you stick to the same one and use it consistently.
You know what my consistency hiccup is? There's two of them, actually. One is the Oxford comma. You know how I feel about this one. I am not.
It's a contentious issue.
It is tough in this space. I'm like, get rid of it. And other people are like, give it to me. But look, neither's right or wrong.
People have strong opinions on the Oxford comma.
So it's like, neither's right or wrong. Pick one and stick with it. As long as you're consistent, no one will notice. The other one that bothers me is the double space between sentences. Do you have an opinion on that? I'm a single space.
Okay, so I'm definitely very much of the single space. I think double spaces isn't that it's people that do, but it's more out of habit.
Yeah.
And when you question why, it's kind of, well, that's because how I've always done it. But I think the question you have to ask is why? Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
Okay, is there a purpose to it? Because if it's going to distract your reader because there's two spaces between each sentence, then maybe you need to consider not using that. If you have if you feel strongly enough about it, at the end of the day, it's your book. So
absolutely,
that's what you want to do.
Absolutely,
then that's fine, as long as your decision is informed and you're happy with that.
Yeah, and you've got to think about that. So I come from a background in communications, PR, journalism, and every character and space matters on a newspaper. So I was trained. Two spaces? Are you kidding? You're giving up prime real estate in the newspaper. No, you can't do that. One space. But as a kid, I was trained. You just double click, boop, boop, and it double space it, you move on. So it's interesting, but it's about consistency, from the beginning. I find that something that I usually coach authors on thinking about in a chapter flow, it's beyond that, it's depending upon the type of book you're reading, but we'll talk about nonfiction right now. You want your readers to kind of have an expectation when they start the chapter, what they're going to get from it, right? Are you going to start with a story and then you wrap up with the key learning at the end? Do you start with some contextual blocks and then you have some, 3 key points, and then at the end of the chapter, they have a space to kind of journal. I don't know, but you want some consistency because your reader will feel more comfortable with that. Like after they read a couple chapters and they know what to expect. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think you could almost relate that to most things in life. People like things to be predictable. They like to know where they stand, and it's exactly the same with a book. People, even from, talking about what you've got on the front of your book and your blurb, that has to tie in with what's inside it. Like it has to all be aligned and fit together, because people don't want to have, they buy it for one thing and then they read it inside and it's something completely different. And that's just going to cause disappointment and confusion. So it is entirely the whole book, from the layout, from how you structure your chapters, right down to individual, word level. So it is, from beginning to end, the whole
Absolutely. Thing. And, if you are listening in today and you go, I have no idea my opinions on Oxford commas and spelling and spacing and even how a chapter should flow, my recommendation to you is maybe you haven't spent enough time writing yet. So if you want to write a book, you need to start by writing. Novel idea, right? That's novel, right? But
writing and reading as well. The two. So read books
absolutely
similar to what you want to write, so you can get a feel for different styles and see what feels right for you.
Absolutely. And then you can start creating kind of your own style guide and figure out what type of style guide you want to kind of mirror after. Can you talk a minute about style guides? Because I know that's something you
do. So style guides are a fantastic tool for ensuring consistency in your book. Because when it comes to, different decisions you make about how you spell a certain word, for example, if you have maybe like 1,000-word essay, that's not too bad. You can probably remember and check through that document and make sure that, everything's the same. But when you're looking at maybe like a 60, 80, 100 plus K word book, I mean, you're not going to be able to do that through memory.
No.
So a style guide it's essentially a list of stylistic decisions. So everything from how the format of your dates and times, because there's so many different ways that you can present a date or a time, to individual spellings and that kind of thing would all be listed in this big reference document that you create, or your editor creates for you. And you can reference back and just make sure that everything ties in. And particularly, if you are planning on doing a series, perhaps having different people work on your book, then again, you've got one set of standards that will cross all your publications. So, in that respect, they really do come into their own. And again, this is something that's used across the publishing industry. It's kind of, I don't know a publishing house that doesn't use a style guide of some kind, because it's so key to ensuring that consistent standard across the board.
I love it, and I love the thought of, as you're writing your book, you creating the style guide too, so then you can pass it along to your editor or your publisher,
Absolutely.
Or whatever. And that style guide too, brands use it. So from an author branding perspective, we create style guides to ensure you have the right fonts and color palettes and all of the messaging, so you can actually create a nice little robust style guide about your brand and how it's all interwoven with your book. And I just think it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Okay.
So good. And it gives you the chance to kind of be intentional as well.
Absolutely.
Because you're having to think about those decisions. So you can decide, does this decision fit with my brand? Does it fit with my messaging? So it gives you the opportunity to kind of take a step back before you step back in again.
I love it. And I love anything about being intentional. To me is important in life, right? Even outside of the manuscript. Anybody that's listening, live this moment intentionally. When you are intentional about everything you do, things are just have a deeper level of fulfillment. And, you've reminded me that intentionality is also could be beautifully brought into your manuscript too. Love everything about it. Okay. First C, we're done. We got consistency down. What's our second one?
So let's go with clarity. the second one.
Go for it. Love that.
So clarity. So thing with having it a clear narrative is really we want to make our readers' lives as easy as possible.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So ideally, they don't even want to be thinking about the fact that they're reading because it flows so well. And yeah, so if your readers kind of get into a sentence and it's a little bit unclear or that it's a bit ambiguous and it could be taken one of two ways, or perhaps they're tripping over some of the words. Again, a little bit like consistency, they're going to get distracted by that, and that's when you start losing your reader. They're not immersed in the plot or the knowledge or the story that you're telling them, because there's something about it that's kind of tripping them up and taking them away from it. So that's why clarity is really important, and why I suggest that if you can, when you're going through the editing process, if you try and read as much of it as you can out loud, because that slows it down. It forces you to read it slower. So one, there's more chance that you'll pick up those stray typos. But also, if you find, as you're saying it, you're stumbling over some of those words, or it's not rolling off the tongue, then that's probably a sign that you need to go back and perhaps look at that sentence and see if it needs to be restructured or reworded slightly.
I like that tip of reading it out loud, because when you're writing, you're too close to your stuff, and your brain will automatically read in your mind what you intended to write.
Absolutely.
And then you'll notice, oh my gosh, there's a massive typo, or I'm missing an entire word. The other thing.
Yeah, we see what we expect to see.
Right. We see what we expect to see. Absolutely.
We'll do conciseness next. So with being concise, that's not to say that you necessarily have to limit your word count, or you don't have to, it doesn't mean you can't be creative with the language that you use, but it's more about cutting out the words that don't bring anything to the party. Right. So quite often words are injected into sentences, words like that, for example, which don't have to be there. You can take them out and the sentence still means the same thing, and actually it will flow a little bit better and a bit smoother. So one of my favourites actually is when people use parts of the body.
I was going to say you have to use that as an example.
An action.
I love that example.
Yeah, so, and people do, because we say it. It's because we say it all the time. And then it translates into our writing because that's how we talk. But so, for example, in case no one knows what I'm talking about, when we say, nod your head, like he nodded his head, we don't have to say his head. We could just say he nodded, because what else do you nod? And the same with shrugging your shoulders. So you can just say he shrugged or she shrugged. You don't have to say their shoulders as well. You can take that bit out, because it's ultimately redundant words, because we know exactly what it means on its own. You know what?
I saw some of you do such a great job on social media giving people writing tips. And when I saw that, I'm like, duh, that's great. No, you're not going to walk with your feet. Like, I'm going to walk down the street with my feet. Well, duh, no. Yes, you walk with your feet, right? You don't need that. But the other part of it that I love, and I think this is just a little tidbit of knowledge for people who are listening, is when you are publishing your book, if you go the self-published route or really any publishing, but self-publish or collaborative publish, you will likely be making an investment based on a page count that is impacted by word count. So when you have those redundant words, which also impact editing pricing, right? Like it impacts the size of
and they add up. Like little words, but they do, they add up.
They add up. They absolutely do. So I love, when you mention that, because I'm like, yeah, of course. And once you get your words out, before you move on, it's taking a peek and looking at that stuff, because you might not realize that those redundancies are there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think really, it's just a case of, again, stepping back and asking, what is the purpose of the word? What is it bringing? Yep. Am I just kind of using a fancy word because I like the sound of it, or for the sake of it, or does it actually serve a purpose?
Right. Right. I have a very hard time with being concise. In my speaking, my kids make fun of me. They're like, you're not allowed to talk to anybody because you won't stop talking. And it's not intentional. I just really enjoy relationship and I enjoy conversation. And I do that in my writing too. So when my editorial board edited or weighed in on my first round of my book, I'll never forget because somebody made the comment to me, I love your chapter, but I don't think you need everything that's in there. And so when we're talking about being concise, as much as it is about sentence structure, I also think you should think about it in regards to your message. And I'll never forget, this is a little Easter egg or tidbit of knowledge. The first chapter of my book talks about a miscarriage my husband and I had. And I know the gender of my child that we lost. And that's important to me. But a friend of mine said, like, is it important to everybody? Like in your story, is that little piece of nugget really important to the overarching story? And he's like, or is that something you can keep to yourself and like own that and the rest of the world doesn't have to know? I thought that is really brilliant. No, they don't. Like, nobody has to know that. I mean, it's not like a secret. We lost a little girl, it's not secret, but in the storyline, did that piece move the conversation? And so when you're looking at your manuscript, think about that too. Like every element that you're sharing, does it really assist in helping get that message across?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because, somebody, I can't remember where I heard this, but they talked about words as in real estate, and they have to earn their place in the book. And it's really hard. I know it's really hard as a writer because you've invested your time writing this and you love all of it. Yeah. And it can be really hard to cut out certain bits. So it is a case of really, really taking a hard look.
Yeah.
Bless you.
Thank you.
and thinking about, how does this impact the storyline, or, if it's non-fiction, the information that I'm wanting to put out there, the plot or whatever, really, isn't necessary or isn't it? And it's not an easy job to do, but it really is an important one.
And another reason why I think everybody thinks that not everybody thinks, I know everybody needs an editor, because your book is your baby and it is hard to make that objective decision sometimes. Yeah. So as you're going through it and making those decisions as best as you can, when you get to the point where it's ready for someone else to help you, that's where someone like you, Jessica, can come in and say, this is great. We don't need this. You don't need this extra part. Let's tighten it. Let's make it really nice and tight in a beautiful package.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the objective person. Yeah. Because, you're so emotionally invested into your work, and you're so, close to it, that really, you need somebody who hasn't got that closeness to the actual book that you've written, that can make those decisions, or at least suggest them. Anyway.
Absolutely. So we've done consistency. We've talked about clarity. We've talked about conciseness. And now we have one more C to go, and that is character.
Character.
Like this one.
My favorite. So, I think a lot of things could come under character. Yeah. We could talk about loads of things under character, but perhaps one of the most important is about being true to your own writing voice, and being true to yourself in your writing. So, I think a lot of writers, especially within the non-fiction realm, perhaps worry that their book isn't original, or someone else has written a self-help book about this topic, which may well be true, sure, but they haven't written it in your words.
Yes.
So it's by writing through your own voice and keeping that style, that's what's going to make you stand out, and that's what's going to endear your readers to you.
Yeah, that is your differentiator, like you. So maybe they've written about the topic, but they can't have written about the topic through your perspective, because only you have that perspective from your past experiences that has helped shape how you see that. I tell authors all the time, that is pivotal. That is that is the beauty of what makes your book so unique. And that is why I agree that your writing should be reflective of that too. You don't want your writing to be, I don't know, to lack that element of personality that is you too. So there's that fine line of, you know, you don't want to edit you out. I always keep you in, but allow for, as you're going through and sharpening your manuscript, ensure that you're elevating you and enhancing you in the process.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It can be a fine balance. I mean, absolutely, like, let your personality shine through, because that's what's going to make you and your book unique. But, you know, like for example, on a really practical level, you can do things like avoiding using cliches and like overused turns of phrase, because those kind of things that your audience will have heard a lot, they're not going to create the same impact as something that's been said in your own words. Yeah. So going through and kind of looking, and again, this is all through the editing process, because cliches will creep in, because they do, because that's how we speak. And like looking at different ways that you could phrase certain things just to put your own spin on it.
I like a friend of mine is a fiction writer, and she shared this tip, and I know you mentioned it too, but the show don't tell, I think, is really interesting. Okay. You know, that concept of like paint the picture and invite your reader in. Don't just tell the story. Any tips on how to do that?
Yeah, so I think show don't tell is really interesting and a really great way to strengthen your narrative. Mm-hmm. It tends to be associated with fiction writing, but actually I think you can use it for any kind of writing. You know, especially if you're writing memoirs or relating a memory or something like that. And show don't tell basically is, if I use the example of when it's raining. So tell me it's raining without telling me it's raining. Okay, so think about like, what does the pavement look like? What can you feel in your skin? What noises can you hear? What can you smell? You know, using your senses to create the environment and explaining that to your audience without saying it was raining. And that can really draw your audience in. That can really elevate your narrative to the next level.
I know now I'm sitting here thinking about the pitter patter of the, on the tin roof and how it makes my daughter's hair curl where it makes mine frizz, right? Little things like that, tells a story, and someone gets excited. When people read, I almost see it similarly to like watching a Netflix show. It's like, I want to zone out and just veg on TV, but I want to also zone out and really like absorb in this book, and painting that picture, showing them the experience is going to help them do that.
Absolutely.
I think out of all of the C's, this one is probably the most important when you're thinking about how to keep your book you and make sure that it is something that you can market. The topic is relevant, obviously, but your spin on it, that's something that's really unique. Which one's your favorite out of the 4 C's, Jessica?
Oh, I love them all. I think all in different ways. So they're all, I think, things like the consistency is really important from kind of like a structural and professional level. I think, character is just absolutely essential for a successful book. I think, to be honest, you need elements of all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. That's a really good question. Really hard to answer.
I know, a hard question to answer, something to ponder. Well, if I've learned anything in this whole publishing experience, it's that I don't have to know everything, but I just have to know who to go to for help when I need it. And you are one of those people for me. So I love the insights that you shared today. I feel like they're really game changing. And I think they're going to help people who are listening today or in the future make sure that they've got a really strong manuscript. And I know it's going to help me on the next book that I'm working on that, it's been in the works for a couple of years, but it's time to make that thing happen. And I know when I'm ready for it to be edited, girl, I'm calling you.
I can't wait. That sounds so exciting.
We have, there's so much more we can talk about on editing, I know. And you and I've already talked about, we need to do a whole season in the Empowered Author podcast on editing. And so we're not going to go into crazy details here today on that process. But it is important for people to know that you want to include editing in your production schedule. Like, build it in. I tell any author, look, even an editor who writes a book needs their book edited. I promise you.
Oh yeah,
don't.
For sure. Even editors need editors.
Yes,
You need that.
we all need it. Do not stop that.
Yeah.
You have to have that. But I think if you use the 4C approach when you're navigating through it, it's going to really ensure that your editor is going to be thankful, but your readers will really be thankful too. Jessica, thanks so much for giving us a glimpse into your approach. I loved having you on.
Oh no, thank you. It's such an honor. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, we definitely must do this again.
We will.